All right, it's 22 minutes past 7. Good to have you with us. The government has clashed with Auckland Council over housing. It was bound to happen. They're run by idiots. The council's threatening to put a halt to some new special housing areas unless the government foots the bill for infrastructure it says is required. But Housing Minister Nick Smith says, not a problem. The government has the power to override the council and approve special housing areas without council consent. Imagine there'll be people up trees and everything. Political reporter Tova O'Brien joins me now. Tova, good morning.
Good morning.
Is Nick Smith serious? It seems to me like he's gone to the biggest weapon he's got in his arsenal first.
It's become a bit of a game of threats and ransoms, hasn't it? He came out yesterday morning saying that, and then not long after the Prime Minister actually come out in the afternoon and hose it down, and then Nick Smith softened his stance as well. But it just goes to show how bad the situation's got, that the council is willing, the council's threatening to not grant consents on those other 42 housing areas, and that the minister's kind of flexing his muscle, saying, well, actually, it doesn't matter what you do because I can steamroll you if I want.
I mean, that's an indication of what the relationship must be like between Nick Smith and Len Brown and the rest of the council, that he is going to say something about.
Exactly, to be a fly on the wall in there at the moment.
Oh, God, yeah, it'd be just a bloodfest, wouldn't it? So who's going to win in this? I mean, at the end of the day, they both staked claim to their own bit of ground.
Yeah, and there are strong arguments on both sides as well. The council says it needs the funding for the infrastructure if those special housing areas are going to be in the more rural areas of Auckland. The developers pay for things like small roads, the pipes, the sewage, the water, etc. But that it needs money for the big roads and the public transport. The government's saying, well, we disproportionately give Auckland money at the moment, according to the population for transport. So you've kind of got enough. But Nick Smith's not ruling out perhaps giving them more money for transport as well. So it'll be interesting.
When did this become an issue, though, Tova? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, we know the government's always forked out money for Auckland. We know that the council's responsibility for roading and things like that, with the exception of the main highways. I mean, when has this all of a sudden become criteria for determining whether you're freeing up the land or not?
It became a much bigger issue, I think, with the housing accord, because these special housing areas have put a lot more pressure on. Exactly. It's put a lot more pressure on the council to build that infrastructure, certainly if they're going to be in those outer areas.
All right. Here's an embarrassment for National. This memo that went around to apparently everybody. Did you get a copy of the Falun Gong memo?
I did. Is it pronounced memo?
Yeah. Yeah.
I say memo.
It's not that I know you do. A lot of people say memo. There are a lot of words that are mispronounced. And actually, if you go to the...
we can agree to disagree on this one.
Well, we don't have to, actually, because I'm right. But if you go to Daniel Jones, the famous pronouncing dictionary, one of the categories for accepting a pronunciation is the fact that it is in common use, as in a majority of people use it. So that's how the language sort of changes, which is why we're not all speaking Shakespearean.
So I'm archaic, is what you're telling me.
No, you're part of the new generation. I'm archaic.
Right.
Anyway,
I see.
Falun Gong.
Yes, I did get a copy of this memo.
You did, God.
Double embarrassing for the government, isn't it, Paul? Because on one hand, this is super sensitive. It's a directive to politicians, to ministers and MPs not to go to Falun Gong events because it's a bad look and they're worried about official protests from the Chinese government. So it raises all these questions about what we're willing to do, how much we're willing to compromise to keep the big guys like China happy. On the other side, it's also embarrassing because this was just meant for national MPs. You do not send out your super sensitive secret memos to the Labour opposition and every other MP.
Well, should you even put them? I mean, God, there's been so many examples of memos going astray. I mean, Nikki Hager's always hovering around in the background. Shouldn't you have some kind of whispering tree or something like that? Should you be writing these memos in the first place?
Well, being a staunch advocate of transparency, I would say yes, because these things should get out there. But arguably the government, if it wanted to not be quite so humiliated by something like this, then yeah, there's probably a more subtle way of doing it.
I mean, there's nothing new about this. Their suggestion that, tread carefully because we love the Chinese. It was the same thing with Helen Clark. Oh, look, Helen Clark's bumped into the Dalai Lama in a hotel, lounge, rather than actually go to his house. Where does he live?
Well, that's exactly right, but then Labour would argue, this does kind of impinge on... It just raises questions, doesn't it, a bit about our much-lauded independent foreign policy and about MPs' freedoms of movement,
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, we need the Chinese more than we need Falun Gong, I suppose. But at the end of the day, we're a free country, or are we? Tova, thank you so much for joining us. We were going to talk to Tova about Ponytail Gate, but it didn't happen yesterday. So good for the House. Apart from Andrew Little, no one really referred to it.